Hello, I'm Edward October. Over the years, I've narrated more ghost stories, horror shows, and creepypastas than I can count. And yet, the crimes discussed on our true crime podcast managed to scare the shit out of me. This program is not suitable for children or the faint of heart. If you are such a person, go ahead and switch off this podcast. Listen to something else. Are you still with us? Well, we've warned you.
Hey, Jen.
Hey, Cam. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty darn good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Before we start, I want to say one thing. A little
housekeeping?
Little housekeeping thing, yeah. As people may know, if you don't, your head's in the sand, but it is really heavy political season here in the U.S. So that means we have chances to have political ads in our podcast. They are not allowed. We have banned them for it, but sometimes these scallywags will say they're one thing and then they sneak in a political ad. We don't allow any political ads from any side of the coin. It's a no-go. This is a politic-free zone. If you hear them, let us know and we'll get it taken care of. But just know that we did not approve them.
They hide them under funny little headings like food product.
Yeah, they pretend it's one thing, but it's actually another. And it's really annoying. If you hear it, we didn't approve it, and let us know.
I did not approve of this message. Also, I would say this on a much lighter note because I'm going to forget. You know, we've talked about that our family doesn't really listen to our podcast ever. I just found out that my good cousin, my favorite boy cousin, named Ron from Illinois, listens to our podcast faithfully.
Hi, Ron.
So
Thanks for
giant
listening,
shout
Ron.
out to Ron. He's a sweetheart. And my mom told me that, but I didn't believe her because it's my mom, right? But apparently it's true. So thanks, Ron.
Well, the only ones from my family that listens are my nieces, Becca and Nikki. So there you go.
Ron apparently is the only one that listens in my family at all. And I'm not kidding. So yeah. But anyway, here, you got a case for us.
I do. It's in Canada. And this was requested by Nick.
Yay, Nick.
And this is
Canada.
Really, it's tough. This one's a tough one.
Oh.
Ready? I don't know if I am, but here it goes.
Okay.
"2017 was a wondrously magical Christmas season. Heaps of heavy white snow had piled on top of Oak Bay and Vancouver Island, and everybody, except maybe the most diehard winter haters, was excited at the prospect of building snowmen and sledding. The town, situated right on the bay, directly across from the state of Washington in the United States, didn't usually get white Christmases, so it was kind of a special treat. An already picturesque town was made magazine-worthy by all the twinkling Christmas lights, red ribbons, and trees laced with candy canes and garland. Those twinkling Christmas lights were soon replaced with the flashing lights of police and emergency responders. The residents of Oak Bay looked in horror, wondering what had happened in the apartment belonging to Andrew Barry and his two little girls in the early morning hours of Christmas. The story the Oak Bay residents would learn was the stuff of every parent's nightmare. Sarah Cotton grew up in Victoria, British Columbia, and she graduated from the University of Victoria in 2005 as a bright, dedicated, ambitious, intelligent woman. In 2007, she joined a public relations firm called the Tartan Group. With all the traits one needs to excel in that field, Sarah settled nicely into her job. In 2009, she went to work for the publicly owned ferry service called British Columbia Ferries, which provided transport between the mainland and the coastal islands. There, she met a man named Andrew Barry, and they began dating. And as their relationship blossomed, they moved in together. In 2011, Andrew and Sarah welcomed their first daughter, Chloe Elizabeth. And then in 2013, they welcomed Aubrey. But it wasn't long before Sarah and Andrew's relationship started to sour. Andrew's behavior started to change. He became verbally and physically abusive towards Sarah. He was often angry and erratic, and one time he threatened to blow up the house. Sometimes when the whole family was in the car together, he would drive recklessly and too fast, scaring everyone. Finally, Sarah reached a point where she no longer felt safe with him, and she realized that whatever their relationship had once been, it had changed drastically. She couldn't imagine sharing a life with him anymore, so she told him to move out. But Andrew felt betrayed and out of control. In April of 2015, on the day he was supposed to move out of the house, Andrew burst into the bedroom where Sarah was busy helping him pack. He threw Sarah onto the bed and held her down by her wrists. Sarah managed to break free, grab the phone, and call the police. The police arrested Andrew, and Sarah obtained a restraining order against him. At this point, Sarah basically became a single parent. This arrangement lasted about 3 months until a peace bond was amended, allowing Andrew supervised visits. Now, I stole this because I didn't know what a peace bond was. But here's the explanation.
I was just about to ask you.
And I wrote it verbatim from the computer. A peace bond is a court order that requires someone to keep the peace with another person. It's often used to protect someone who has been threatened but not harmed, and can be used instead of criminal charges or as a condition for withdrawing charges. Peace bonds are similar to civil court restraining orders, but are based on a lower burden of proof.
I was just going to say that sounded like the nicer version of our restraining order or protection order down here in the States.
This is a hellish landscape that some divorced parents must navigate. Once a child is born to two people, you're pretty much tied to that person in some way or another for the next 18 years, until the child is a legal adult. Hashing out schedules and child support and custody agreements can be grueling. And while some couples are able to maneuver through this territory with minimal damage, some, especially if one or both parents are battling their own mental health crisis, can't. Despite a court order mandating child support payments to Sarah, Andrew refused to comply for almost 2 years.
Whoa.
Sarah was allowed to purchase Andrew's share of their home at a highly discounted rate. Andrew's share in the house was about $60,000. And by judge orders, Sarah was allowed to buy it from him for $20,000. The judge took into consideration that Andrew hadn't paid child support when making this ruling. Andrew, however, felt that this was deeply unfair. Unfortunately, like so many other dissolved relationships, the courtroom became a battleground. And in the middle of all this jockeying back and forth for control and money, the children and their well-being sort of faded into the background. Judges and lawyers just move names around on a document and forget that very real human children are behind these decisions.
Not to interject here, but I would think, especially with some mental struggles, that would not bode well that you're being forced to sell your house. I would be scared if I were her, I guess is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Chloe Elizabeth was born in 2011. She's a first grader at Christ Church Cathedral School, and she had recently fallen in love with horseback riding, and she was excited at the prospect of learning the French language. She was clever, articulate, and wise beyond her years. And like many first graders, her smile was missing front teeth. She was artistic and considerate, and when asked what her favorite thing about Christmas holidays was, she said spending time with family. Little Aubrey was born in 2013 and was in her last year of preschool at St. Christopher Montessori School. Known as the wild child in the family, she was spirited and energetic. She had recently played the angel Gabriel in the Christmas pageant at preschool. The two girls shared a deep sisterly bond and were described as lively, silly, and very, very sweet. The situation between Sarah and Andrew continued to deteriorate when Sarah discovered a soft spot, is what they described it, on Aubrey's head after she returned from her father's house. Since Sarah had been on the receiving end of Andrew's outbursts, she was concerned that he had maybe lost temper with Aubrey. Another time, Aubrey told Sarah that her father had touched her inappropriately on her genitals. So this prompted an investigation by the MCFD, which is the Ministry of Children and Family Development. During the investigation, Andrew's visits were supervised. And while the ministry recommended that he undergo parenting classes, it doesn't appear that a psychological evaluation or an investigation into his financial situation was ever done on him. The MCFD found no evidence that the touching was criminal or sexual in nature. Andrew maintained that he had only tickled Aubrey. At the end of 2016, the custody battle finally went to court, where Sarah voiced her concern about Andrew's ability to care for the girls. She accused him of leaving one of them in a stroller in a public place while he did something else, and she accused him of speaking negatively about her to their children. Andrew, of course, denied all accusations. Justice Victoria Gray awarded the majority of custody to Sarah Cotton, while Andrew was granted intermittent custody on a 14-day rotating basis. This included overnight stays and every other holiday. Justice Gray stated, quote, "The father is a loving father who has much to offer his daughters." She also said, quote, "Andrew has displayed poor judgment and care for the girls." She included the fact that he talked badly about Sarah to his daughters and also that he often slept with one or more of the girls in the same bed. And despite these concerns, she concluded that his behaviors were transient and relatively minor, especially because the girls were generally happy and healthy. She felt their well-being would be enhanced by maintaining a relationship with their father. But Andrew would make a mockery of this statement. On December 21st, 2017, Sarah celebrated her birthday with Chloe and Aubrey. The girls had a chance to play in the snow, and they looked forward to Christmas like most kids do. Their excitement was palpable as Sarah dropped them off at Andrew's Beach and Goodwin Street apartment. Andrew's apartment was in a desirable part of town, with a stunning view of the marina and the bay beyond. However, a knot formed in Sarah's stomach as she pulled up to Andrew's apartment. It was totally dark. When she voiced her concern that maybe Andrew wasn't even home, Chloe said, "Oh, he's home. We use flashlights, just like camping." She went on to say that the lights were always off at their father's house. Sarah rightfully assumed that the power was out in Andrew's apartment. Andrew had quit his job in May of that year, and maybe he couldn't afford to keep the lights on. I mean, if so, did he have food for the girls in their apartment? I mean, it was Christmas, right? What's Christmas without food? If there was no power, did they have heat? I mean, it was an apartment building, so, I mean, even without power, it's pretty doubtful that Andrew's apartment would get so cold that the kids would suffer any ramifications. But it would still get really cold,
It'd
especially
be cold.
if there's a bunch of snow on the ground.
If the other apartments are using heat, but still, it's still going to be cold.
It's still cold, right. But still, it bothered her. But not wanting to ruin Christmas for the girls or Andrew, Sarah decided that she would mention the lack of power later. For now, she just wanted to get through the holiday without a major fight. On December 22nd, Sarah realized that Chloe had left her favorite stuffed animal, Lammy, at her house. So after making preparations for the Christmas holiday and wrapping all the Christmas presents, Sarah decided to take Lammy over to Andrew's because she knew Chloe would be missing it. When she arrived at Andrew's apartment, she knocked on the door. Two little blonde heads yanked back the curtains and excitedly waved at their mother. Chloe was wearing a pink dragon costume when she answered the door, and Sarah hugged them, told them that she'd seen them at noon on Christmas when their dad was scheduled to return them home, and then she told them she loved them. And that knot was still in Sarah's stomach. She emailed Andrew a few times over the next 3 days, mostly to talk about the girls' upcoming schedules, returning to school and so forth. And Andrew read the first email, didn't respond, and he never opened the other emails. And that knot in Sarah's stomach, it got a little bigger. On Christmas Day, Sarah got up and made last-minute preparations. Andrew's parents were going to join her and the girls for Christmas dinner at her home at about 2 o'clock that afternoon. And after Andrew dropped the girls off at noon, she would have about 2 hours for Santa and their own little celebration before the grandparents arrived. But noon came and went, and there was no sign of Andrew, Chloe, and Aubrey. 1 o'clock, and still no Andrew. All calls and texts went unanswered. You know what, Cam? If you would have told me last year that I'd be sleeping like a baby by simply putting cream on my neck, I would have thought you were lying to me.
I mean, who knew?
I know. I was using over-the-counter meds that made me feel groggy and foggy-headed the next morning, and I absolutely hated it, but I didn't know a better way. Thank goodness I found sleep cream. Sleep cream uses all-natural CBD, which allows my body to get what it craves. A restful night's sleep.
Now, don't be leery of using this because of CBD. It doesn't go into your bloodstream. It just reacts to your skin's nerve receptors. So you're not going to feel loopy or even fail a drug test. You're only going to feel relaxed and rested after a nice 7 to 8 hour sleep. Who knew that this non-sticky, lavender-scented cream could help me sleep so well?
So try it for a couple of nights and see how it works for you. And if you don't experience better sleep, Sleep Cream will refund your purchase. It's as simple as that. I mean, you don't even have to return a thing. I mean, so what do you have to lose except for another night of amazing rest? Order your bottle at sleepcream.com. That's CREME.com. And use code OTC podcast. That's all one word. Use it at checkout and save $20 on your first order.
Seriously, you guys need to go now. Go and order a bottle of Sleep Cream. That's CREME.com. Use code OTC podcast, all one word, at checkout, and you're going to save $20 on your first order.
When Andrew's parents, Brenda and Malcolm Berry, arrived at 2 o'clock, Sarah was beyond worried. She called Andrew's sister, but she hadn't heard from him either. Andrew wasn't on good terms with his parents because he believed they were being unfair to him and because they picked Sarah's side in the custody fight. His sister is an RCMP officer, that's the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. She's kind of unidentified. They never identify who she is. But she was still Andrew's friend and confidant. If his sister didn't know where he was or hadn't heard from him, then that made Sarah all the more worried. Finally, Sarah and Brenda went to the apartment to see what was happening, and Andrew's father, Malcolm, stayed at Sarah's house just in case Andrew did show up while Sarah and Brenda were gone. On one hand, Sarah was generally worried that something bad had happened, maybe a car accident. And on the other hand, it was not beyond Andrew to be difficult just because he could. He would like to throw a curveball on Sarah's day. So she wasn't quite to the point of panic when she arrived at Andrew's apartment. When Aubrey and Chloe didn't pop up at the window, shoving the curtains aside excitedly, Sarah grew more concerned. She and Brenda banged on the door and they knocked on the window, but there was still no answer. She went to a neighbor who said she had heard loud crashing noises earlier that morning. Another neighbor said that she heard the girls earlier, but they had been silent for a while. All Sarah could think was, had Andrew gone somewhere with the girls? Several communications with Malcolm showed that Andrew had not returned to her house yet. Finally, not knowing what else to do, Sarah and Brenda went to the police and reported the girls missing. The first to arrive on the scene was Constable Peter Ulanowski. He knocked on the front door but got no answer. He went to the site manager to get a key for the apartment and finally gained entrance. The first thing he noticed was that everything was pitch black. There was no ambient light from electronics or the television, nothing. Just darkness. He flipped on his flashlight and immediately stopped his search of the house as soon as he realized what he was seeing. In his words, he saw blood and carnage. He left the apartment, closed the front door, and called for backup. Sergeant Michael Martin arrived on the scene and noticed Constable Peter standing in front of the building, making circular motions with his flashlight to alert the sergeant to the correct apartment. The two turned on their flashlights and began walking their way slowly through the apartment together. In the eerie silence, the beams of flashlights landed on blood smears across the walls and floors. There was enough blood that it concerned Sergeant Martin, and so he radioed into the communications center, upgrading the situation from a Code 3 to a Code 4, meaning that this was a major incident and everybody except those directly involved in the incident had to stay off the airwaves. Martin later said that his concern wasn't for preserving the scene at the time. He was more concerned with rendering assistance to those who might need it. His judgment would prove prudent when they came across a naked, blood-soaked Andrew Berry laying in the bathtub. He was injured with stab wounds to his neck and throat, and he was breathing slowly. Sergeant Martin told the constable to stay with Andrew while he searched the rest of the apartment. At that point, he didn't know if the man in the tub was a victim or a perpetrator. Martin made his way further into the apartment, looking for the two little girls described in the missing persons report. After searching the living room and kitchen, he didn't find anyone, so he returned down the hallway to the first of the 2 bedrooms. Inside the first bedroom, the sergeant found a tiny, lifeless body laying on a bed saturated with blood. It was 6-year-old Chloe. Her hair was matted with blood, and a baseball bat was entangled in her hair. Her pajamas were soaked with blood, and Lammy was laying beside her. The sergeant searched for a pulse, but she was cold and stiff. Rigor mortis had already set in. Again, the sergeant noticed several stab wounds. He went on to the second bedroom where he found 4-year-old Aubrey, who had just lit up the stage days before as Angel Gabriel, and she was laying in a pool of blood. She also had no pulse. Constable Sandrine Perry arrived on the scene and offered to do a second check for pulses. Quote, "I was hoping I was wrong," Constable Martin said. He was hoping that he made a mistake, that the little girls weren't really dead. However, Martin didn't want to expose Constable Perry to the horrors of the scene. Quote, "Sometimes you see things and you can't unsee them," he said, wiping away tears. However, Constable Perry realized the importance of the task at hand and followed Martin back to the bedrooms, where she confirmed that both girls were dead. They'd been murdered on Christmas. However, in the bathroom, their father survived. Paramedics put him on a stretcher and moved him to the hallway. He uttered, "Kill me, just kill me," as they put him on a stretcher, and he was sent to the hospital. Detectives suspected that Andrew Perry had killed his daughters and then tried to take his own life. While Andrew was swept off to the hospital and the coroner came to gather the little bodies, the investigation team got to work on evidence in the apartment. They soon realized Andrew Barry had not been attacked in the shower or the bathtub while bathing. They found his clothing, jeans and a shirt, stiffened with blood. Some of that blood would belong to his 2 daughters, but some was also his. There were also slash marks in the shirt, leading investigators to believe that he'd murdered his daughters, and then after stabbing himself, he undressed himself, got into the bathroom, and then stabbed his own throat. But they didn't want to get ahead of themselves. They needed to gather the evidence and let the evidence make the conclusion. In Aubrey's bedroom, a black-handled knife was found abandoned on the floor. The living room had extensive droplet stains and blood-soaked sock prints. In the kitchen, they found blood on the cabinets and refrigerators. They even found blood inside one of the kitchen drawers. At some point, whoever had killed the little girls had also taken the time to sit on the sides of the beds, as if contemplating what they had just done. They found a note in the living room that said, "Dear Santa, enjoy the bunny crackers from Chloe, Aubrey, and Andy. Merry Christmas." Another note from the girls informed Santa that an unopened toothbrush was for him to use after he ate the crackers. In a different room, a note was written to Andrew's sister in Andrew's handwriting. There was another note found in the house that investigators thought was another form of a suicide note, and it wouldn't come to light until later that he'd written the letter months before, when he had previously contemplated suicide. It was a 3-page letter to his sister detailing grievances against his parents, including, this is all according to Andrew, their decision to renege on the agreement to give him $50,000 from a settlement they received, telling Sarah harmful things about Andrew and refusing to stop even after he asked them to. And he also believed that they had called child services against him as a form of revenge for an argument they had had over religion. Andrew also detailed his grievances against Sarah, including calling child services, blaming him for Aubrey's head trauma and, quote, getting away with it, and radically altering his time with the kids, quote, just because. It was the last straw, he said. Towards the end, he wrote, quote, betrayed, bullied, and miscast, I set out to leave with the kids. I love you and your children, but I thought it better for myself and kids to escape. By the end of their search of the apartment, the police concluded that there was no forced entry into the home and no trail of blood or blood evidence to suggest that there was anybody else involved in the murder of Chloe and Aubrey, except their father. At the hospital, Barry's wounds were deemed not life-threatening, and not once did he inquire about the well-being of his daughters, nor did he inquire about what happened, which, you'd think that if he'd truly been attacked by someone else, would have been his first question.
Not if you know. Not if you know what happened.
During the visit with his sister at the hospital, he pointed to his chest and said, "I did this." Since it was difficult for him to speak at the time because of injuries to his throat, his sister wrote him a note that said, quote, "This will likely be the last time you see me. Tell me everything you need me to know." Andrew wrote back, "I love you. I'm sorry. I have no idea what to say. I think I understand not wanting to see me. I don't remember what I did, but I tried suicide. I left a note on the table." Meanwhile, back at the police station, Sarah Cotton's heart was pounding in her chest. She needed to know where her daughters were and what was going on. The police informed Sarah that her daughters had been injured, which gave Sarah a brief moment of relief, thinking at least they're alive. Then the police officer went on to finish, telling her that they didn't survive. Sarah later said on the witness stand, quote, "I screamed like never before." Sarah designated a family friend to be her spokesperson during the following weeks. Family and friends surrounded her as she planned their funerals of her two little girls. A candlelight vigil was organized on Willow Beach on December 30th, 2017. The girls loved to play on that pristine, calm beach. The First Nations played drum music into the night in the girls' honor. The public funeral was held at Christ Church Cathedral, and over 1,000 people paid their respects. The church was decorated in pink and purple ribbons, the girls' favorite colors. In the middle of the school auditorium, those in attendance surrounded Sarah Cotton in one giant hug as she said goodbye to her angels. The girls were later cremated. An investigation was started to see if the MCFD had failed Chloe and Aubrey. Had they fallen through the cracks? One accusation was that Justice Gray had downplayed the allegations against Andrew. However, officials stated that this case would have appeared to Justice Gray just like thousands of other cases that played out in the Canadian justice system. Nothing in this case stood out as unique to her. And in other words, there was no way to know that Andrew would butcher his two little girls. But if he had undergone a psych evaluation, if there had been a home visit, if there had been any look into his background, it might have just stood out to her. So you have to wonder if his parents were questioned during the custody trial. Surely if the man's parents had reported him to child services, that would have given the judge some cause of concern. Surely something needed to be done beyond ordering Andrew to take childcare classes. After the deaths of Chloe and Aubrey, after it was too late, an investigation revealed that Andrew was a man falling apart at the seams. He was deeply in debt and had a vicious gambling addiction. He had gambled before he met Sarah, but had managed to keep that demon at bay for the most part until his relationship had taken a turn for the worst. And once that happened, Andrew claimed that his gambling was, quote, made worse by their separation. He resigned from his job in May of 2017 so that he could access his pension to try to pay his bills and pay off gambling debts. At the time the couple were in court fighting over custody of their children, Andrew was spending $3,000 a month on gambling. At one point, he did win a $100,000 lottery, but then he lost all of his winnings within a week. He allegedly borrowed $10,000 from a guy named Paul, whose last name he didn't know. But when he couldn't pay Paul back on time, Paul said he now owed him $25,000. Apparently, the money from his pension did not go to this mysterious Paul character, even though that's why he supposedly quit his job and took the money out of his pension. The trial went straight to the Supreme Court and skipped the preliminary hearings. Andrew now claimed he was innocent and that some nefarious, shady guys had broken into his house, murdered his daughter, and tried to murder him, even though he'd clearly told first responders to let him die and told his sister, "I did this." His defense team called all the first responders and Sarah Cotton herself to the witness stand and made them relive their trauma, all because Andrew refused to accept responsibility for his actions. The defense claimed that this mysterious Paul had murdered Chloe and Aubrey and that Paul, or men working for him, had slipped out of the apartment while Constance Peter Ulanowski had left the crime scene unattended for 5 minutes while talking with Sergeant Martin when he first arrived. Seems plausible. Andrew claimed he had been asked to hold a bag for Paul and his cohorts on several occasions, never questioning what was in the bag. He eventually gave Paul a key to his apartment so he could come and go as needed, and that's why there was no sign of a forced entry. When pressed for more details about Paul, Andrew said that he only knew Paul as a Chinese man in his early 50s. Reminds me of Susan Smith.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was so much blood at the crime scene, forensic experts were unable to say if just one individual perpetrated the crime or if there had been multiple people involved because there was too much blood. So much of it overlapped, and it was nearly impossible to follow a coherent trail. Andrew's story was that he and the girls played out in the snow. Then he put them in their jammies and put them to bed. Once in his room, he was then tackled onto his bed and stabbed in the throat. He lost consciousness right after that. When he came to, he said he cried and crawled to Chloe's bed. When he went to the kitchen to get a knife to defend himself, but was once again overpowered, thrown to the ground and stabbed again. He couldn't identify his attackers. The next thing he knew, he woke up in the bathtub surrounded by first responders. When prosecutors asked him why he never mentioned this attack when the police arrived at his apartment, he said, quote, "Because I wanted to be left alone to die." The defense went on to say that his suicide note, even if it had been written a month or two before Christmas, showed that he would never hurt his children because in it he mentioned future care for his children. But the prosecution said that Andrew had murdered his children out of resentment towards Sarah. They explained, quote, "If he couldn't have the girls in his life, then neither could Sarah." If this was his true motive, it appears as though Andrew Barry didn't realize that it wasn't about him or Sarah. It was about Chloe and Aubrey, and they wanted to live. The prosecuting attorney said, quote, "Like everything else in his life, Andrew refused to take responsibility. There was no Paul." Aside from the obvious admissions to his sister that he was responsible, and aside from the pleas of the EMTs to let him die, the prosecution pointed out a few things. One, in response to the accusation that Constable Peter had somehow let the killer sneak out of the back door, the girls were already cold and stiff when the first responders arrived on the scene. It had been some time since the girls had been brutally attacked. I mean, why would these killers still be in the apartment when the constable arrived? Why wouldn't he have left immediately? Secondly, no shoe prints were found in the apartment, only sock prints. And there were no bloody sock prints outside the apartment, so it wasn't as though the killer took off their shoes first and then stepped outside and put their shoes back on, once they had finished murdering everyone. And it's important to note that Sarah and Andrew's mother did not see any shoes waiting outside the apartment to be filled by the killer fleeing the scene. And there was no bloody trail leading away from the apartment, either in socks or shoes. For the logically minded individual, the questions don't stop there. No fingerprints aside from Andrew's, Chloe's, or Aubrey's were found in the house. And why would his attackers undress him and stick him in the bathtub? And what's more, why kill the children at all? Why wouldn't they just kill Andrew? He was alone in his apartment. Why deliberately pick a day when children would be with him? And possibly, most obviously, why murder Andrew if it was just over an unpaid debt? Once you kill the guy who owes you money, he's not going to pay you back. The jury deliberated for 3 days and found Andrew guilty on both counts of second-degree murder. Now, I looked why it was only second degree and I couldn't find it. I'm just assuming that it was maybe more easier for them to get him on the second-degree charge than first degree. That's all I can think.
Yeah, easier to nail him with something.
Exactly. The fact that Andrew had time to contemplate that he'd just murdered his own gracious, innocent children before moving on to do the same thing to the remaining daughter, it bothered the jury and the judge. He could have spared the other one's life, but he didn't. Before Andrew's sentencing, Sarah gave a heart-wrenching victim impact statement. In part, she said, quote, "Anything I say does not articulate the depth of my grief and loss, as this is a nightmare that I can never wake up from. This trial was the antithesis of the healing process. I was re-traumatized by all of the details that were revealed and made public through the media. I would brace myself every day for new information that I was not previously aware of. To try to understand how the father of my children is capable of doing such a horrific and unimaginable act to his own daughters is inconceivable, as all they did was love him. My identity is gone. My social role has had to change. I am no longer the mother who takes her children to school every day, making their meals, caring for them, ensuring that they are safe and having the best life possible. I now feel a deep void and an emptiness that will never go away. There's profound pain and sadness at all of the memories we had and all of the future memories we will never get to have. I was so honored to be their mother. That's all I ever wanted to be, and I was a mother before anything else. Our house hummed with energy, giggles, fast little footsteps, and sometimes tears. And there was so much life and joy in our house, and now it is all gone silent. If you can read that whole thing without crying, God love you. It's impactful. Let's just say that. Andrew was sentenced to a life in prison with the minimum of just 22 years. That's less than 11 years per child, and he will be eligible for parole in 2040. Shortly after the deaths of Chloe and Aubrey, changes were made to Canada's Federal Divorce Act and the way the courts treated custody cases. At the time of Andrew and Sarah's divorce, the guidelines that were mentioned were only violence, and now it extends to types of abuse beyond just physical violence, which must be considered in all proceedings. This extensive list of behaviors includes physical abuse, sexual abuse, failure to provide necessities of life, psychological abuse such as ridiculing and yelling at family members in a threatening, controlling manner, financial abuse such as not giving a spouse access to their own money or preventing them from working, and lastly, threats to harm or kill, or actually killing or harming an animal or damaging property. Sarah Cotton, who is now remarried, said she felt unsupported in the court process when she was battling Andrew in court and hopes that the updated list changes things for other parents going through the custody process. Quote, I just hope that recognizing these signs will help protect women and children and anybody who's in danger or who has been at risk, she said in an interview. Now, to say this case is sad and devastating and traumatic is an understatement. The very act of pleading not guilty showed that Andrew Barry had failed to see that he was not a victim, that he was a perpetrator of everything wrong in his own life. Sarah didn't ask him to leave for no reason. His parents just didn't decide that one day to be mean to him. Their decisions, where he was concerned, showed that they had deep misgivings about his ability as a father and his refusal to seek professional help with his gambling issues. Ironically, he complained about their, quote, negative talk about him to Sarah, but failed to see that he acted in the same way with his own children. It was nobody else's fault that he was unable to care for his children. He even blamed his worsening gambling addiction on his separation from Sarah rather than accepting responsibility for that addiction in the first place. Nobody told him to quit his job, and nobody coerced him into committing the ultimate vile act of murdering 2 little girls in their own bed while they slept, dreaming of Christmas morning and their gifts from Santa. While he may have enacted revenge on his parents and Sarah, his little girls paid the price. And beyond Sarah and her family and Andrew's family, the first responders of that crime scene Christmas morning suffered deep psychological trauma. Most couldn't make it through their testimonies without breaking down in tears. But what this did to all the children that Chloe and Aubrey knew, their friends from school and church, is also unfathomable. As the anniversary of Chloe and Aubrey's death rolled around, the community went on with life. Oak Bay put out their Christmas lights and candy canes, and one little girl who had been Chloe's best friend in the first grade wrote her Christmas list. The first item on her wish list was Chloe Barry's name. Unable to fully comprehend what had transpired, she knew she wanted her best friend back. And if anybody could make that happen, it was Santa.
I just want to make a point about mental illness. It doesn't matter if it's the father or the mother. Obviously, this is not the answer. It is never okay. I say that because recently we got a review claiming that we would have shaded the man and protected the woman, and that's not true at all. I disagree with that. If you listen to us, if you know us as people, Jen suffers from depression. I have my own issues. Either way, there's definitely something wrong with them, anyone when they take a life, but especially when a parent takes their own child's life. That to me is the biggest crime of all. There is nothing worse than that. I just wanted to get that out there.
This one was really tough to do. There is a bursary fund. It's the Chloe and Aubrey Berry Bursary Fund. The money that is donated is used to support a scholarship for 2 girls each year entering kindergarten and the first grade. So I will put a link down if anybody wants to
I love that.
feel the need to donate it. Mm-hmm.
It
They
means
both love school.
the girls' names go on too,
Mhm.
right? Like
Yep.
they will be remembered every year.
Yep. So
You did a good job. That's heartbreaking. And
this was brutal. We kept out the details because it's really unfathomable what a father did to his tiny
babies.
girls. It was overkill. It's bad.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't even want to think about it. It's heart-wrenching.
Like I said, I do think this is the most brutal crime of all. It is the most ruthless. It's the worst of the worst. I mean, mothers kill their kids. Look at Diane Downs and Andrea Yates. We both covered them.
Susan
And then
Smith.
men kill their children too. That is not a normal human act. That's not the way the world is supposed to work. So it's heartbreaking. And to do that, obviously he was trying to hurt the mom. And that's the number one thing to do. They cannot be a person when they do that. They cannot be in the act of killing your own child. They must not be able to see that child as theirs or even a person, I guess. They're so consumed with the hatred and the anger that they have and trying to influence pain and harm on the other parent. They have to be insane at that moment. They have to really be insane, I would think. But that's me as a parent.
But he stopped. It seems like he stopped at each one and thought about what happened and then continued on. So
I guess that's how I justify it, because it would make me feel better that a father or a mother could never do that to their child and that they must temporarily step out of their head, out of their body. I don't know. There's no words. I mean, I don't even know how you...
I don't know. Kudos to Loretta. She did all this research and everything, and I couldn't have done it. So she said that there were times that she had broke down so much that her husband came in to just hold her. So
all
anyway,
right. Well, you did a good
thanks, Nick.
job. Yeah. I don't really think we need to talk about much after that. I think that's a little heavy
I think it is a little heavy, but just remember, speaking of heavy, no political ads are to cross this feed at all. So if you hear them, it's not us, but let us know. We normally take responsibility of things, but we will not take responsibility for any political ads that come through our feed.
And it doesn't matter either side, any side, it doesn't matter. That's not the time and the place, and we are not spokespeople for that. They sneak them in there and we get a call, and then also it goes state by state. So Jen called me one time and I was at work and I was let me go listen. And I go listen and I don't hear it. Well, it ran, I think it was in the state of Texas, but not here. It depends. So even if we listen to it, so then Jen had to call our people and get them to yank it off and all that
yell
stuff.
at them. And then I was blamed because I allowed the food ad. And it's that's not food, that's politics. But they had put it on under food. And
they're tricky.
It's a mess. They're
tricky because most people that do a podcast that isn't a political podcast would not touch politics.
No.
So of course they have to sneak that stuff in when they can. Sneaky little birds, I tell you.
Very sneaky. So anyway, that's it. That's all I have for this week.
All right,
I think
Jen.
I need a drink.
I think you do. Until next time, remember, lock your doors.
Keep passing by those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Love ya. For more information about this episode, as well as all other sources, please check out our show notes or the podcast website at ourtruecrimepodcast.com. Our True Crime Podcast is developed and created by the hosts, Jen and Cam. Original music and audio mix of all our True Crime Podcast episodes is courtesy of Nico Vertese from We Talk of Dreams. You can reach Nico at wetalkofdreams.com. Listener discretion is provided by Edward October from OctoberPod VHS. You can find all of his great works on YouTube. Please make sure to like and subscribe to our True Crime Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. We can be reached on Instagram and Facebook at Our True Crime Podcast or on Twitter with the handle at Our True Crime Pod. You can also email us at ourtruecrimepodcast@gmail.com. We would also at this time like to thank our patrons. We would be so lost without you. Thank you so much. And if you would like to help support the show, you can check us out on patreon.com/Our True Crime Podcast. You can also show your support by leaving a 5-star review on Apple or simply just tell your friends about us. It's that easy. Love ya.